Welcome to our very first podcast. My name is John Bryant, and I'm here as always with Nathan Rogers from Longview Missionary Baptist Church and our friend Chad Graves. And Chad, we're glad to have you here today. And,
Thank you.
We're just very delighted to be able to present this podcast to you, and I hope that it's a blessing to you.
Yeah, so this podcast, the Driven podcast, it's a podcast for thinkers and leaders, and this really started as a vision that the three of us had. Chad and I had a discussion several years ago about something like this. So it's good to have you as our first guest, and John and I kind of took that a little farther, and here we are. So John, why don't we have this? What's the purpose of our podcast?
I know that as long as I've been in the ministry, which has been a long time, I have been blessed by listening to podcasts and by putting a cassette tape in my car. And I don't think anything like that ever came on an 8-track tape, or I would have been able to do that early on. But it's always been a blessing and encouragement, and I've learned so much down through the years by doing that. And I just feel like that we need to highlight some of our leaders within our work that are just doing an amazing job, that have a great mind, and God is using them in a mighty way. And so, you know, that a podcast is a way to get into, to give people that opportunity to hear and to learn.
Yeah, and Chad, we were talking earlier off air, and you made the comment, you said leaders are listeners. Expound on that a little bit.
Yeah, so from my experience, my first listening was in Discovery. I listened to Tom McElmurray, 22 hours of that kind of stuff. But I listened to Adrian Rogers in the mornings preach. That was my first experience of really just listening and knowing the importance of hearing things. And then my first experience of leadership listening was John Maxwell. I began to just consume all those tapes. And Russell Kelfer, too. I listened to 1,000 tapes of his. And so listening has kind of accelerated things for me, given me verbiage and given me things that were beyond my capacity, beyond my experience level. Listening to someone say something that I never even thought about, and then that kind of opens it all up to me. So yeah, I see the importance of listening to the content, hearing guys talk about preaching, about practicalities, about missions, all of those things. And the beauty of it is we've got some great guys out there doing wonderful things, and so we want to hear from them.
I agree. You know, in 17 years of ministry, one of the things I've learned is that I can't do it on my own. You know, and man, there's a treasure to be found out there in the ideas of other people. And the more and more I connect and network with other pastors and other ministry leaders, the more I learn that there's ideas that would be fantastic leadership ideas, ministry ideas that if applied to my church would work well. I haven't thought about them. But someone else has.
And even controversial or provocative ideas. I've been to Catalyst and heard somebody speak and thought, I don't agree with that at all.
Right.
But it helped flesh out what I do believe.
Sure.
So my pastor used to say, you know, eat it like fish. Get the meat and throw out the bones.
Right.
And there's going to be a lot of people that we'll bring in to talk to that not everyone's going to agree with. They're not going to maybe even like them. But I think they deserve a hearing.
And it can provoke us.
Right. Yeah.
And it can stir us. And, you know, sometimes that's maybe where the good growth happens, when we get stirred that way.
Right.
Right. So that's our goal, right? Is to stir and provoke. A podcast for leaders and thinkers. And so we hope that as we go through this podcast that that's exactly what we do. We provoke thought. We stir up some. What's the word I'm looking for, Chad? Something within you that just that makes you long to be a better leader, to do things better, that'll clarify things in your mind. And you know, the other thing is it gives an avenue for a digital avenue for people to network, to know names, to know what's going on. You know what people are doing as we bring in guys that are missionaries, that are pastors, that are church leaders. You'll kind of start to know the stories and what's happening at the churches all around our country and all around our work, and I think that's exciting as well.
Be a great way to celebrate what God's doing.
Right, yeah. And it says here on our logo that it is a podcast for thinkers and leaders. When we're talking about thinkers,
What we mean
what
by
are we
that
thinking
is,
about?
well, we don't want anybody that doesn't think or doesn't lead listening to our podcast. No, I'm just kidding.
Or at least speaking in our podcast.
You know, I had something happen a while back. I was listening to Michelle Bauckham, and the commentator on TV said that they were talking about presidential candidates, and they said that particular candidate didn't possess the intellectual curiosity to be the president. And when I left that thought, that time, I walked away from that moment and I thought, intellectual curiosity. I think being a pastor, you need to possess a biblical curiosity. You need to possess a heart for God curiosity. And it's a hunger. You begin to hunger for knowing God and knowing people who know God and knowing what God's doing. And so I think when we talk about driven, it is a spiritual curiosity. And you need to be possessing a spiritual curiosity. You don't need to kick your mind and your heart into cruise control and just float through life. You need to be waking up with a sense of wonder. What is God going to do? And like David said, I fainted at the idea that I might live my life and not see God work and live among in the land of the living. He said, I don't know what that word faint means in the Hebrew, but I think he's like, I dreaded the idea that I wasn't going to get to be a part of what God was going to do. And I wanted to see, if God did it in other people's lives, I want to see God do it in my life, in our people, in our generation.
And I think you hit a nerve when you said that we often are on cruise control, just letting things happen. And hopefully this podcast will put the brake on and knock the cruise control off and get us energized and at least get us thinking and get us
Hopefully it'll be a
leading.
word fitly spoken.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, you know, I noticed as we were talking through it a little bit, you made the comment that your journey began with listening all the way back to tapes and things like that, and leaders are listeners. And I couldn't help but think about, connecting that title of the podcast, Driven, to my experiences when I am a listener. I know as a pastor, it's easy to become complacent. It's easy to settle into what's happening at my church, to what I'm doing or I'm not doing, and just take it easy, hit cruise control and roll.
Have you ever been there?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
me too.
And so one of the things that I've noticed though is when I do have a chance to listen. Whether it's listening to a leadership podcast or throwing in a sermon series on CD or even going to a conference or an association meeting or something like that, where I get to sit around a table with other pastors and listen to what's happening, what they're doing, that motivates me. It's the thing that gets me out of the rut, that forces me out of complacency, because there's something about hearing the stories and hearing the ideas from other people that motivates me to be more and to do more for the Lord, like you said with David. And sometimes if we're not careful, we can neglect that very thing that you talked about, that feigning that David had. We can neglect that in our own soul, or somehow we can suppress that. And I think that just by hearing what God's doing, what God desires to do, talking to other people that God's doing stuff through, it's a motivator for me, and that's what I hope this podcast becomes, is driven. It
I like
drives
what you
people.
said there about the hearing, because faith comes by hearing, hearing by the Word of God. And that in there, it's the rhema. It's the utterance, not just the logos, which I hate to use the word just when it comes to logos, but there's this rhema, there's this utterance that's happened to us. We've heard from the Lord. And man, what a beautiful place to pop in us. That's why I believe in reading books, and I believe in listening to podcasts, and because you do all this work as a pastor on a text, and then it's done Sunday. But if you can produce it or send it out, it just keeps living on and on and on.
Yeah.
And so that's my prayer, that you'll have guys come in, they'll share something, and it may be 2 years later, like a Tom bomb, let off in another man's heart,
Right.
and set him on fire, you know, and give him a vision for where his ministry could go.
Right. That's why this podcast is so important, and I think it's very timely because, you know, we obviously have an enemy that is against us being motivated, and complacency is a disease that we all are vulnerable to.
Yeah, I would say it this way: discouragement is a liar. If you're out there and you're listening and you're discouraged, you just need to know that discouragement's a liar. Satan puts his bony finger in your chest, and he's the accuser of the brethren. He lies, and if God be for you, who can be against you? You need to move forward.
Yeah, good.
So with that said, our Driven podcast, kind of the way this is going to work and the way it'll be formatted is we're going to have guests. It's going to be a weekly podcast. We're going to have guests that come in and sit down with us on a regular basis. Some of those guests may record one podcast with us. We may get 4 or 5 podcasts worth of material out of a single guest, like we probably will with Chad coming up. But that's the goal of the podcast, and we want people to just use this however they need. If it's something to motivate them, we want it to be something that motivates. If it's something to help you pop in your ear and get through mowing the yard, maybe it'll be entertaining enough that it'll help with that too. It'll be a great way to hear ideas, to network and get familiar with people. If you want to watch it, there's going to be a video version and an audio version, so you can just listen or you can watch and see. See our
I don't know
ugly
why
faces
anyone
too.
would want to watch. But
I don't either, but probably to look at you, John. You handsome
no,
devil.
that's not true.
So yeah, that's the Driven podcast. Any final thoughts, fellas?
Well, I would just say that I'm thankful for both of you men, your ministries, your work, your legacy of leadership, your longevity in ministry. At this season in life, I greatly honor that and value that in men who are stable and consistent, and your labor in the Lord is not in vain.
All right.
Well, I want to say this, that it's really a blessing to me personally to sit between you two guys, because sometimes we have the idea that we're out here all alone and there's not really a younger generation. And I know y'all are not real young, but it's just a blessing to me to hear both of you. I mean, both of you just bless me, and I appreciate the opportunity to sit here in between y'all.
Well, thank you, brother. We appreciate the opportunity to learn and gain wisdom from you as well.
Yeah.
Well, so that's it. That's the Driven podcast. That's what it'll be. Appreciate having these guys in with us today. We hope that you will make this a part of your regular listening, and man, we want it to become a tool that is used in great ways for God's glory. So, Chad, John, thanks for being with us on this first podcast, and I'm Nathan Rogers. It's good to have you listening. We'll see you next time.